Hello everyone, Freemantle here. And today I want to take a look at something odd connected with democracy. A few years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments in a case called Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission. In that case, the court decided against restraints on amounts of money that businesses and some other groups can donate in election campaigns. Against restraints. The opinion became notorious among liberals. They talked about how the decision had probably launched a new era of under-the-table financing and weakened laws against corruption. Some thought the Supreme Court's decision could be used to permit businesses and unions to speak their minds, freely, to employees about elections or to allow party politicking on their property. Some liberals, judging the Supreme Court to be at least conservative-leaning, speculated that the court might use Citizens United as precedent for allowing big spenders to spend as much of their money on election campaigns as they wanted. In particular, liberals raised the question of whether big money would be able to buy the 2010 elections that were then rapidly approaching. This is an odd position for the liberal to take. And of course, he's taken it for years. Advocating campaign financing limits, which he often refers to as campaign financing reform. It's odd because liberals are staunch, unremitting advocates of democracy. My question is, how could a strong advocate of democracy be an advocate of campaign spending limits? Well, let's think about that. And we might as well begin with democracy and how and why it's important to the liberal. I don't know any short phrase that captures it. America is a democracy, he'll say, meaning that democracy is fundamental to America. He often says this when he's skewering big business or big money for corrupting our democracy. The sense of it is that what America is and ought to be is a democracy. Yes, he means that, but he has more in mind. America is a democracy would be a little better way of understanding what democracy means to him. Because here the emphasis begins to suggest that democracy is more than a form of government. You say America is a democracy, and you could be suggesting that somehow America and democracy are identical, and the very same thing given two different names. The phrase social democracy, which the liberal uses to refer to some of the nations of Western Europe, is better yet, because here it's clearly extending the idea of democracy beyond government, out to society as a whole. Social democracy, you see. I think the best way to get a sense of what democracy is to the liberal is to look at the spectacular success of the word in American idiom, spelling out and spreading far beyond politics. The word democratic has come to mean all or everyone or a large share of the public. I've heard of democratizing financial services, meaning that they're spreading, they're becoming more available to more people. Somewhere I read that Barnes & Noble has democratized books. We could talk about democratized car ownership in view of all the Model Ts that Henry Ford sold, and that wouldn't seem a strange thing to say. It might be thought that this very wide use of the word democracy is explained by Americans putting a very high value on the democratic form of their government, except I'd say their level of interest in matters governmental is usually a lot lower than their concern with their private lives. I credit most of the word's widespread use to liberal marketing of liberal ideas. Liberal talk about democracy is incessant. The grade school concept of it is that in a democracy, the citizens choose individuals among them to represent them, speak in their place, do certain business for them, sometimes called the public business, while the citizens retain ultimate control over the representatives. So the representatives serve the citizens they represent. If they don't do what the citizens want them to do, the representatives can be replaced. The citizens retain ultimate control because they examine the issues, they examine the candidates, and they vote them out when they're failing to do what the citizens want. I'd say this grade school conception of democracy is a reasonable way to set out, at least roughly, the view of our founding fathers, too. But it's not the liberals' view, calling for campaign financing reform. Because if the citizens are driving whatever the government officials do, the government officials are not in a position to set conditions for the citizens the way they, the representatives, want, conditions for political campaigning included. A liberal might say, well, no, we're consistent with that traditional idea because the government is representing the citizens when it arranges electioneering conditions. It's doing what the citizens would do. For example, if we liberals succeed in getting campaign spending limits, well, then the government is representing citizens who want the limits. But if the citizens can examine the issues and the candidates and cast informed, reasoned votes, the citizens don't need conditions to be arranged so that they can cast reasoned, informed votes. And if we citizens need to have government officials set the conditions for our democratic decisions, what are the prospects for our democracy producing good decisions? If we can't listen to candidates, read their ads and so forth, dismiss the hype and ballyhoo, think critically about the rest of what they say, and cast reasoned, informed votes, if we can't do all that, what are the prospects for democracy in America? The liberal might reply, well, look, the purpose of limiting campaign spending is that it puts limits on electioneering that citizens want, or at least that they ought to want. The government is needed to enforce those limits on candidates. Well, what are these limits going to control? They're going to be limitations on what? There are only two possibilities here. They could control, directly or indirectly, what the candidate says in the campaign, or they could control the candidates saying it. I doubt the liberal would tell us he wants to control what candidates are allowed to say. The freedom to speak your mind is still strongly popular in America, I'd say. But so what if he can say what he pleases if he can't say it to the voters? He can't present his position on the issue unless he can say what his position is and say that to the people who are eligible to vote. And if we're going to maximize the citizens' opportunity to hear the candidates, reflect on what they say, and cast reasoned, critically minded votes, the candidate needs to be able to maximize his communication with the citizens, getting his message out as often to as many people as he can whose votes he's trying to win. And yes, getting his message out as persuasively as he can. To persuade is to give a person reasons for believing or doing something, like why we should vote for Smith. The reasons can be very bad. They could be lies. Political candidates have been known to lie, as I recall. But bad reasons and lies are just two specific cases of the hype and ballyhoo we just talked about. If we citizens can spot hype and ballyhoo for what it is, and then we dismiss it, we don't need spending limits or other campaign reform to choke it off. A given voter may need a little help from his friends in penetrating campaign rhetoric, that's true. But if voters generally can't do that, one way or another, representative government, where the citizen calls the tune, democracy in the grade school and founding fathers concept, can't survive. If founding fathers democracy is going to survive, political candidates have to be able to express themselves fully, and voters have to be able to handle it. Now, the liberal might say, our target is not the voter, it's corruption in office. Money spent in campaigns buys influence in office. But that doesn't wash either. Let's suppose the worst possible case from a liberal point of view. Jones is elected to office, and he's elected precisely for the reason the liberal envisions. Jones spends big bucks, especially with a flurry of beautiful, oversized postcard ads in the last 10 days before the voting. Maybe you've gotten some of those through the years. I have. So, Jones goes into office, and he starts to work on his pro-business agenda. Now, aren't his committee assignments and his votes on the floor a matter of public record? Are there no leftist investigative reporters who can snoop out what he's doing to help business? Are there no liberal newspapers, TV shows, internet magazines that would print such a story? I say there would be no substantial trouble at all unmasking the pro-business elected official, and then he can be voted out in the next election. Big money that puts bad people in office is not a major problem in robust democratic elections. The original idea for democracy in the United States was the Founding Fathers concept. The representatives speak in place of the citizens, do business for them, look out for their interests. That gradually faded into the idea that the representatives are there to benefit the citizens, do what's good for them. That faded into do what's good for them whether they know it or not. That faded into good even if they think it's bad. That faded into what the representatives believe is good, leadership, with government officials leading and citizens following. Leadership informed by the citizens' wishes, but certainly not limited to them. Government a standalone authority in society, directing society for the good of the followers, the citizens. That's how democracy works in the liberal view. That's what he so strongly advocates and calls democracy. So, how can he advocate democracy and at the same time advocate campaign spending limits? My original question in this video. It's because, in his view, democracy includes government leading the citizen. And because he has an extremely low opinion of the citizen. The ordinary guy, average adult, ordinarily intelligent, ordinarily rational, ordinarily informed. The liberal believes this person is gullible, malleable, impressionable, impulsive, impassioned, a lazy thinker, an incompetent thinker, a person who needs government leadership. For one thing, arranging political campaign conditions so they aren't too intellectually demanding. I say that people do not deserve the very low opinion of them the liberal has, which is the subject of another video. Democracy does not require nursery room coddling by the government, standing outside the electoral process and arranging it for the citizen's own good. The citizen can look after his own. I say democracy does have a place, a secondary place, but it does have a place in the operations of good government. And where it does, democracy is not a gift to us from government officials. Democracy is a way in which the citizens call the tune. The citizens are the leaders, and the government, the representatives, do what they're told. I talk about democracy in other videos, but the takeaway from today's video is this. We can't have political candidates maximizing their communication with citizens if we have the liberals' restrictions on campaign spending. We won't have those restrictions on campaign spending if we don't have the liberals' extremely low opinion of the average person. And if in fact we don't have that liberal opinion of the average guy, we're going to say it doesn't make any difference how much candidates spend. They can spend till they're blue in the face. The ordinary person is intelligent enough, critically minded enough to sort it out if he wants to. He may not want to. He may not be interested. But his interest in the matter is a separate problem. Thank you for listening.